Putin won't stop at just Ukraine. Whether it's to resurrect his vision of the Russian Empire or to punish those who've stood firmly by Ukraine, many experts predict he'll push further into Europe. And it's not just analysts sounding the alarm. The potential targets know this threat all too well. Germany is one of them, and it's at the top of Putin's list of potential targets. So we have to ask, what would happen if Putin attacked Germany? Or perhaps more fittingly, when Putin attacks Germany? And we're not the only ones asking this. The German public broadcaster Bayerischer Rundfunk is also concerned. That's why they sat down for an interview with Lieutenant General André Bodemann on their online platform, BR24. Before diving into his insights, let's take a moment to understand who Bodemann is and why his perspective carries weight in this conversation. Lieutenant General André Bodemann is a highly decorated, seasoned military leader with decades of experience in the German army. Currently serving as the commander of the Bundeswehr's Territorial Command, he oversees national defense operations and homeland security tasks, ensuring the protection of German soil. Bodemann's extensive background includes leadership roles in key NATO missions, including operations in Kosovo and Afghanistan, and significant experience in the Federal Ministry of Defense. With a career spanning from platoon leader to his current post as a lieutenant general, his deep understanding of military strategy and his hands-on experience in some of the most challenging geopolitical landscapes make him an expert on the threats Europe faces today. And today there's no greater threat to Europe's security than Russia, something Bodemann knows all too well. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Germany has been an unwavering supporter of the resisting nation. 3 years into the invasion, the country has committed an astounding $29 billion in military aid to Ukraine. This includes funding for security capacity building and the provision of military equipment from both industry and Germany's own armed forces stocks. In 2024 alone, Germany allocated approximately $7.3 billion to support Ukraine's defense efforts, with an additional $6.2 billion in commitments for the coming years. This isn't surprising given Germany's previous track record. By the end of 2023, the country had already spent around $5.2 billion, with another $1.66 billion spent in 2022. In addition, over 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been trained in Germany at a cost of around $292 million. In the grand scheme of things, Germany ranks as the second largest individual donor, just behind the United States. In Europe, it's only outpaced by the collective contributions from the EU. Germany's commitment to Ukraine is not just significant, it's a defining stance against Russian aggression. Interestingly, Bodemann doesn't directly cite Germany's robust aid to Ukraine as the reason Putin might set his sights on the country. Instead, he highlights the critical geostrategic role Germany plays in Europe. As Bodemann puts it, Germany is right in the heart of Europe. This central position carries significant implications for the continent's defense. If Russia were to push further into NATO territory, especially on the eastern flank, Germany would be a key player in NATO's response. Bodemann stresses that NATO would have to respond with its defense plans and mobilize allied forces. If Russia conducted a maneuver on NATO's eastern flank with the potential to threaten NATO territory. And with Germany's central position, the bulk of that mobilization would run through German soil. This places the country directly in the crosshairs. However, it's important to note that Bodemann is speaking hypothetically, as he clearly states that he's not saying that Russia will attack. He does, however, say that Russia isn't just threatening, but is also actually capable of acting suddenly. But this action might not be what you expect. That's why the interviewer, Christian Nitsche, brings up the Little Green Men from Crimea. For context, the Little Green Men were the unmarked Russian soldiers who appeared in Crimea in 2014 suddenly and without warning. These troops, wearing Russian-style uniforms but with no identifying insignia, took control of key sites, including government buildings and military installations. At the time, President Putin denied their Russian identity, calling them local self-defense units, only to later admit their involvement after the operation had succeeded. This tactic was a key part of Russia's strategy in Crimea, and Bodemann suggests it could easily be repeated in other NATO territories. In his conversation with Nitsche, he acknowledges that something like this could happen in places like Estonia. However, Bodemann also warns that the sudden appearance of such forces might not be the only warning sign. He points to subtler indicators, like the movement of critical resources, such as blood reserves, toward borders. If you start moving blood reserves to the border and this is noticed, then it means something, he explains. This suggests not just a show of force, but an actual intent to act, signaling that Russia's aggression is not always obvious or conventional. It's precisely this kind of stealthy hybrid warfare that NATO needs to be prepared for, especially when you consider that a similar event had already happened before Russia invaded Ukraine. That's what makes it so alarming. Reports from US officials noted that Russia began moving blood supplies and medical materials to its borders in late January 2022, signaling that Moscow was preparing for an escalation. As retired US Lieutenant General Ben Hodges explained, "You would not execute an attack unless you have that in hand." In other words, the presence of blood reserves is a concrete sign that Russia was preparing for casualties, readying itself for a full-scale military operation. These new reports of similar logistical preparations tell NATO that Russia is beyond the stage of mere posturing, though truthfully NATO has known this for quite some time. That's why it has significantly increased its military presence in the east. Russia might be preparing for a war with NATO, but NATO won't be caught off guard, that's for sure. In fact, NATO has been long ready for such a scenario, particularly in response to Russia's aggression and its increasingly unpredictable behavior. The alliance has taken deliberate and decisive steps to bolster its military presence along its eastern flank, which directly addresses concerns raised by Bodemann regarding a potential Russian maneuver. Since 2017, NATO has been enhancing its forward presence, particularly in countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, with multinational battle groups led by the UK, Canada, Germany, and the US respectively. These battle groups serve as a visible demonstration of NATO's resolve and its commitment to defend its territory. However, the urgency of NATO's military preparedness was accelerated after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. NATO expanded its eastern presence by doubling the number of battle groups in the region, adding more forces to Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. This brought the total to 8 multinational battle groups, significantly increasing the number of boots on the ground. But NATO's military readiness isn't just a show of force, it involves robust logistics, interoperability, and swift mobilization. With the inclusion of Finland and Sweden into NATO and the growing integration of various military units across member states, NATO's eastern flank is now a highly fortified and interconnected region. This is crucial because any threat to Germany is, in essence, a threat to the entire alliance. Remember, an attack on one is an attack on all. That's what Article 5 of the NATO Treaty is all about. Article 5 is at the core of NATO's strength, a promise that each member is bound to come to the defense of others in times of need. It was crafted in 1949 in response to the threat of the Soviet Union's expansion across Europe. The principle of collective defense was designed to deter aggression by ensuring that any attack on one member will be met with a unified, powerful response from all. It turns every NATO member into a shield for the others, and no country is left vulnerable or alone. But Article 5 also sets a high bar. It's not invoked lightly. In fact, this article was only ever invoked once, after the September 11 attacks in 2001, when the US was targeted by terrorists. So if anyone thinks NATO is just waiting for one wrong move to pounce on Russia, they couldn't be more mistaken. That's also what Bodemann hammers home in his interview. He emphasized that NATO's defense plans, including Germany's operational strategies, are not about preparing for war at all costs. Instead, they are designed to deter aggression and avoid escalation. Bodemann points out that NATO's primary goal is to prevent conflict by being ready to mobilize in a way that de-escalates tensions, especially in the event of a Russian threat along NATO's eastern flank. The idea is to stop things from getting to the point where war becomes a necessity, which is why the plans are designed to keep things in check long before a state of defense is even declared. If we achieve that, we have accomplished everything, he concludes. But here's the thing, Putin won't make this achievement easy. As Bodemann notes, the real concern is that Putin may have more aggressive ambitions than NATO's careful deterrence strategies can prevent. In fact, he's already taking significant steps to rebuild and strengthen Russia's military, which certainly raises the stakes. Putin has long expressed his desire to restore territories once part of the Soviet Union, and now intelligence reports indicate that Russia is heavily investing in its military. The worst part? These investments aren't about replacing what was lost in Ukraine. Bodemann highlights that Russia is producing between 1,000 and 1,500 tanks annually, many of which are being stored and not used in Ukraine. That's why this buildup of military resources signals preparedness for a broader, longer-term strategy. Then there's also the shift in Russian society, where education materials now focus on preparing children for war, and not in a way that teaches how to prevent war, but rather what to do in war, Bodemann explains. These shocking findings underscore just how serious Putin is about his plans. All things considered, he is setting the stage for an even more direct confrontation with NATO in the future. And that future might be closer than you think. If Russia continues its military restructuring and builds up its forces with help from countries like China, Iran, and North Korea, it could be in a position to challenge NATO within the next few years. Germany's intelligence chief, Bruno Karl, says that Russia's military restructuring is one of the largest since 2008, signaling a clear preparation for potential conflict with the West by 2030. That's only 5 years into the future. And that's why NATO's goal, as Bodemann sees it, is not just to prevent war, but to be prepared if it inevitably comes. His words resonate deeply, reminding us what's at stake. If it comes to this, we will be ready to defend what we hold dear. Now, a full military confrontation might still be a few years away, but this doesn't mean that Germany isn't already facing the looming dangers of Russian threats. Only these threats are hybrid. Bodemann doesn't mince his words here. He says that Germany isn't at war formally and legally. However, he believes that his country hasn't been at peace for a long time either. You see, Germany faces a large number of hybrid attacks every day, a phenomenon that is noticeably increasing, according to Bodemann. These attacks often don't involve traditional warfare, but rather covert tactics designed to destabilize and undermine the state. For instance, there are tangible threats already present within Germany, including the discovery of military-grade explosives near NATO facilities. These explosives were found buried close to critical infrastructure, like the NATO pipeline system, designed to supply fuel to military bases. The purpose behind these acts? Well, it's unclear, according to Bodemann. Who benefits from this, and for what purpose could it be used, he asks. The worrying part is that such acts aren't isolated. They could very well be part of a larger strategy to probe vulnerabilities, test weaknesses, and prepare for more significant disruptions. It's not just about military action anymore. It's about subtly shifting the balance of power, creating chaos under the radar. It's a threat that is as silent as it is dangerous, and it's right on Germany's doorstep. In fact, hybrid warfare could very well be the primary method through which Germany is attacked. And Nietzsche and Bodemann discuss this scenario in their conversation. The interviewer begins by referencing a 2023 American film, Leave the World Behind, to frame a hypothetical scenario about how a country could be attacked. He describes how the film shows that an attack doesn't necessarily need to involve missiles. Instead, it's about taking down communications networks, disrupting transportation, and spreading disinformation to create chaos from within. He then asks Bodemann whether such a scenario is one of the threats he considers when thinking about hybrid warfare. Bodemann responds by acknowledging that the situation described in the film isn't just fiction. In fact, it's already happening. He explains that modern hybrid warfare involves more than just physical confrontation. It can include disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, and other disruptive actions that don't involve direct military force. He adds that through cyber attacks, critical infrastructure like energy providers, transportation hubs, and even ports can be targeted and brought to a halt without firing a single shot. One of the most alarming forms of hybrid threats, Bodemann stresses, is sabotage. Though Bodemann doesn't dive into the specifics, it's clear that sabotage is a growing concern for Germany. Recent incidents are proving the point. For example, holes mysteriously appeared in fences of water facilities surrounding German military bases. This isn't just a random act, it's a deliberate vulnerability being exposed. That's why Germany has been on high alert for a few years now. With its continued military support for Ukraine, suspicion of Russian involvement is constantly rising. As Bodemann puts it, there isn't always Putin's business card lying there as evidence, or a proverbial smoking gun to definitively prove who is behind each attack or act of sabotage. However, more often than not, these attacks are eventually directly tied to Russia. Take, for instance, the alleged plot to assassinate Rheinmetall's CEO, Germany's top weapons manufacturer. The plot was uncovered in July 2024. In January 2025, NATO's Deputy Assistant Secretary General James Apatory confirmed reports that Armin Purpurger was targeted in a Russian-backed assassination plot. This is no ordinary threat. It's a full-on attempt to destabilize key players in the defense industry, and it's coming straight from Russia. And this is just one of the many incidents that conveniently benefit Russia. There's also the high-profile security blunder. A Luftwaffe phone call was tapped by foreign agents. This was a major embarrassment for Berlin and a sign of the gaps in their counterintelligence systems. But sabotage doesn't stop with spying. There's also the targeted disruption of critical infrastructure. Just recently, 2 German-Russian nationals were arrested for plotting to sabotage US military bases in Bavaria. This isn't just a one-off issue, it's part of a wider trend. But the most dramatic act of sabotage, the Nord Stream pipeline explosion in 2022. On September 26, 2022, a series of underwater explosions damaged 3 out of 4 Nord Stream pipelines, causing significant gas leaks and rendering them inoperable. While we're still uncertain about the perpetrators, the fact that it happened shows just how vulnerable critical infrastructure can be. And it's not just Germany. Other European countries are experiencing similar acts of sabotage. But with Germany hosting many US military bases, it's particularly exposed. The German government knows it needs to take action. That's why it adopted the Crisis Umbrella Act, designed to protect critical infrastructure. Bodemann is optimistic about Germany's efforts, but he's quick to point out the challenges that remain. He also highlights the increased strategic importance of the Baltic Sea, with pipelines and undersea cables running through it. These areas are crucial, and that's why they've been targeted by sabotage attempts. That's also why Germany is stepping up its game. Naval patrols are more frequent, and they've increased cooperation with NATO. As Bodemann explains, we're much better networked than in the past. There's also better coordination with critical infrastructure operators, including port owners and shipping companies, which help track any suspicious activities. It's a smart move, no doubt. As Bodemann puts it, every wind turbine is now a sensor, showing how even the smallest details matter in this defense effort. Still, the threat has evolved. Bodemann admits that it's not enough just to watch ships. The rise of underwater drones and unmanned vehicles complicates the situation. He notes, "We have Navy Special Forces, divers and combat swimmers, but what if we have to defend against underwater robots?" Germany is making progress, but it's clear there's a long road ahead. As the risks grow, Bodemann stresses that a more robust response will be needed to stay ahead of these evolving threats. While Germany is enhancing its defense against sabotage, the bigger question remains, is the country prepared for a full-scale military attack? With rising tensions in Europe and the ongoing war in Ukraine, it's crucial to assess Germany's readiness for a more severe and direct threat. That's why Nietzsche poses a blunt question. How well prepared is Germany for a real crisis? Bodemann doesn't hesitate. He gets straight to the point. He explains that Germany has been working with a large team, around 150 people, including members from the Bundeswehr, various federal ministries, and other organizations, to devise a robust response plan for potential threats. And the plan wasn't rushed. Bodemann notes they spent well over 100 days in classified settings working out every detail. This shows just how meticulous and well thought out Germany's preparation is for a major crisis. A key component of this preparation is the Germany Hub concept. This involves ensuring that Germany is able to protect its own borders. That's concern number one. But concern number two is supporting NATO's defense plans. Bodemann highlights the importance of logistical support in moving military convoys across German territory. How do we ensure that an American convoy, for an example, which lands in Vlissingen, Netherlands, moves through the Netherlands, crosses Germany's various federal states, and reaches Poland and Lithuania with full logistical support? He asks. This question gets to the heart of the matter. Germany must ensure smooth, rapid troop movements while still operating within the legal framework of peacetime. Bodemann's descriptions are pretty on par with Germany's previously unveiled plan, Operation Deutschland. This over 1,000 pages long plan is specifically designed for a large-scale crisis and prompted by Russia's actions in Europe. It outlines how the country would protect critical infrastructure, help mobilize up to 800,000 troops, facilitate the movement of up to 200,000 military assets, and prepare civilians for an emergency. Speaking of civilians, Bodemann also discusses what would happen to them if Russia attacked Germany. Germany can't just rely on the military, Bodemann explains. The civilian population would be critical in keeping the country running. With active troops likely stationed on NATO's eastern flank, Germany's main task would be logistical support. But instead of the Bundeswehr running everything, civilian businesses would step in. For example, private fuel companies would supply convoys and caterers would provide meals instead of military kitchens. It's not quite a call for everyone to fire up their grills, but it does show how civilians would step in to make sure the military gets fed, even if it's through the humble power of a sandwich, as Nietzsche humorously points out. But it's not just about logistics. Hospitals would face an overwhelming influx of casualties. We're talking about far greater numbers than in Afghanistan or Mali, Bodemann warns. The sheer scale would push the civilian healthcare system into overdrive. Civilian hospitals would need to team up with military hospitals to handle blast and gunshot wounds. Doctors need to be ready to handle injuries and wound patterns they don't typically see in everyday hospitals, he adds. And it doesn't stop there. In a full-scale crisis, companies would need to keep running because life must go on, Bodemann insists. Whether it's maintaining supply chains or keeping shops open, businesses will be essential for Germany to stay functional. He reflects on the situation in Ukraine. People still go to work and visit cafes. We must ensure that life continues as normally as possible, he concludes. This normalcy will give people a chance to get away from the war for a few moments, as Bodemann puts it. However, it's also the exact opposite of what the enemy wants to achieve. The enemy wants to prevent us from having this semblance of normal life, he explains. So leading a somewhat normal life becomes a powerful form of resistance in itself. But what do you think? Will Germany need this or any kind of resistance anytime soon? And what do you think of Lieutenant General Bodemann's predictions and views? Do you agree with all of them? We're looking forward to hearing from you in the comments section below.